All right, the end of the world in every major religion. Let's get into it. Eschatology is a fancy word that refers to the study of the end times, or where souls go after we die in context of different religions or world beliefs. So if you hear me use the word eschatology or eschatological, that's just what I'm talking about. All right, Judaism, Jewish eschatology. This mostly comes from the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. Books like Isaiah and Daniel reference certain things, and this is where they pulled from. But you also get some later eschatological traditions that come up from the Talmud and thinkers like Maimonides and other rabbis and scholars in the community that had their own ideas. To sort of generalize here a little bit, the end of the world in Judaism looks like this. God will redeem Israel and the Israelites, the people of Israel, and return them to their land and give them back their rightful land, particularly the temple, which was taken from them in the Babylonian exile. And of course, if you know your Old Testament, your Hebrew Bible, you know that it was rebuilt and then destroyed again in 70 CE by Titus. So Zion will be restored, all will be right with the chosen people, the people of Israel, and the Jewish Messiah will return and usher in an age of peace, an age of justice. The dead will be resurrected, and there will be a new age, a new heaven and earth. Now, a more esoteric group of Jewish thinkers, known as the Kabbalah, they had their own specific timing for when they thought this would happen, and they actually viewed the 7 days of the week as sort of a symbolic reference for the 7 days that God created everything in. And with the 6th day being the Jewish day of rest, Shabbat, they then believed that that must mean that the end of the world, all of this, the Jewish Messiah returning and everything being restored, must happen in the 6th millennium. So they often think, okay, that means 6,000 years after sometime after creation, some thought. Well, you would have to believe that the earth was created less than 6,000 years ago. Different thinkers have different opinions on this, but this is just a small sect, the Kabbalah. A majority of Judaism is amillennial, meaning that they don't really believe there's a specific time frame. They don't believe to have knowledge of when exactly this is going to happen. All right, Zoroastrianism, the great Persian dualistic religion. They believed that at this point, good will ultimately, for good, no pun intended, prevail over evil. So the good deity, Ahura Mazda, will prevail over Ahriman, the evil, malevolent deity. Earth will be restored to its perfection as it was created in and was eventually corrupted. And everyone, all individuals, will be judged. The salvation of the individual will be tallied up from their thoughts, words, deeds, actions. Everything in their life will be kind of statistically tallied up to result in how saved they will be. I find that very interesting because it's very similar to the idea of karma in the dharmic religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism. It's different because, Zoroastrianism is more like Christianity and Islam in the sense that, the world had a beginning and it has an end, whereas the dharmic religions are more cyclical and eternalistic, but still that idea of your individual thoughts and deeds being tallied up is very similar to the idea of karma. Possibly because those religions were very similar geographically. They're very close in geography. Who knows? All right, a big one. Christianity. We all probably know, or at least I do, being in North America, about, Christian eschatology, which talks about the second coming of Jesus Christ. And Christian eschatology is a culmination of what we already talked about in Judaism, which might have sounded familiar because those are a part of the Old Testament in Christianity, so those things are taken into account. But you add on the Gospels, what Jesus is talking about and what his apostles talk about, but also the letters of Paul and the book of Revelation, which is huge. Now, we're going to get into the weeds about some different Christian eschatological positions and arguments about when things will happen and what will happen, but the general overarching sort of things that happen are destruction, chaos, an era of war and pillaging, which this is often called the Great Tribulation, which will then result in the second coming of Jesus Christ, and all of the living and the dead will be judged before God. Now let's get into the weeds about some arguments. First, let's look at the book of Revelation. So, in terms of Revelation, there is a position called the Futurists, who believe that the book of Revelation and its contents will be fulfilled literally in the future. The things that happen in Revelation, the dragon, the fire, the swords, the angels, that's literally going to happen at some point in the future. The Preterists, they believe that the contents of Revelation already occurred. They believe it was more symbolic, and what the author, who is commonly referred to as John the Revelator or John of Patmos, the author was writing for his era in the decades that would follow the persecution under Rome, and that those events already occurred in Rome just decades or within a century after when that was written, usually dated to the late 1st century, early 2nd century CE. And then we have the historicists. Now, the historicists believe that all of the figures and the things that are being talked about in Revelation are referring to specific historical people in and around the time frame with which Revelation was written. Now, most critical biblical scholars fall into this category. They believe that the 7 heads of the dragon are referring to the 7 hills of Rome, right? And the number of the beast translates through code to the Hebrew that refers to the Emperor Nero, who had died shortly before, but they thought might be returning, or at least his children who were ruling would return in their persecution. Lastly, you have the idealists, or the idealistic interpretation of Revelation, which believe that its contents are merely symbolic. Okay, so those are the different eschatological interpretations of Revelation, which is a huge book referring to the end times in Christianity. But now we have to look at the arguments that different denominations have for how the end times are going to go down and in what order. Okay. So the first view here is called millennialism. These folks believe that there will be a literal millennium, a literal 1,000 years of paradise, or a golden age, if you will, of God's people here on earth before the second coming of Jesus. Now, I'm going to show you a chart for kind of the rest of these, just to give you a good picture, but obviously there are little offshoots and arguments about specific things, but here's sort of a general overview of the rest. So first, you can see we have post-tribulational premillennialism. These people are saying, okay, you see Jesus comes all the way over here where the cross is, and then we're living. Okay, there's going to be this era of tribulation, the Great Tribulation, this horror that is talked about many times in the Bible. And then the second coming of Jesus happens, we have a millennium of golden age, and then the last judgment happens. And then you can see we have this pre-tribulational, or it's more popularly called dispensational premillennialism. And these people believe that you're going to have sort of the second coming, but only for the church. It's very, very specific. And then tribulation is going to occur. Then the second coming will happen for everyone. There will be a millennium of peace, at least for the believers. And then the final judgment. Okay, and then you have postmillennialism, which believe that there will be that millennium of, golden age, and then the second coming and last judgment happens all at the end of that. Okay, and then the last, you have amillennialism down there, which basically means, okay, all this stuff, it's just symbolic. There will be a symbolic time of peace on earth before the second coming, the last judgment. It's important to note here that Catholics and a lot of mainline Protestants, so that would be like Anglicans, Methodists, they are amillennial, meaning they believe it's more symbolic. They don't have any specific literal. They just believe the second coming is going to come at some point. We don't really have advanced knowledge of that. And something I like to say is the more knowledge a group claims to have, usually the more specific their eschatology is, at least within Christianity. So, for example, the Jehovah's Witness, they are dispensational premillennialists, meaning they believe that, there's going to be this second coming just for them, which they call the rapture, and then there's going to be that tribulation, and then another second coming, and then this. And it's important to note that the idea of the rapture, which you hear a lot about in evangelicalism, evangelical Protestantism here in the United States in particular, is a very new concept. It really arose in the 18th century through sort of biblical misinterpretation, this idea that, there will be an early second coming and the believers and followers will then raise up and be taken to heaven while everyone else suffers on earth. The sort of Left Behind series is kind of playing off the idea of rapture, but it is not biblical, and that is widely known. Okay, we're done with Christianity. We can move on. Okay, the Mormons, the Church of Latter-day Saints. They believe, they follow in the tradition of Christianity, so they are amillennialists. They believe that there is a second coming and that Jesus is involved in that. He will come back. There will be judgment. They just don't have a specific timeline for that. They believe we can't know when that's going to happen. They also believe some other stuff is going to happen as well. You'll get your own planet, some stuff like that. All in all, I would just call it Christianity Extreme, Christianity Deluxe. Moving on. Okay, Islam. And this will also cover Sufism as well. For Sunni Islam, a cloud of black smoke will cover the earth, and the earth will start to sink into the ground in various places. The false Messiah will appear, the Antichrist, and try to convince people to follow him, and some will, particularly the bad people who aren't ready. Muhammad will be resurrected first. Jesus will also be resurrected. The prophets will be resurrected. Everyone, the dead will return to life, similar to Christianity, and everyone will be judged, which is a very common theme. With Shia Islam, and probably Sufism as well, which is a more aesthetic form of Islam, all of that is pretty much the same, except that the end times will be ushered in by the 12th Imam. That is the 12th appointed successor of Muhammad, which is the big difference between Sunni and Shia Islam. Sunni Islam does not have these very specific characteristics, these specific 12 imams. All right, the Bahai Faith, which comes out of Persia and follows in the tradition of the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, and then, of course, Shia Islam. The Baha'is have an eternalistic view of everything. So they do not believe that there is a beginning, a literal beginning or end to anything. They believe that the eschatologies of the end times in various religions are true in a sense, because Baha'is believe in all faiths in a sense, but they believe that they are a part of a series of divine revelations that have already been fulfilled. For example, the coming of the 12th Imam in Islam, which will usher in a new age of peace, they believe that that is their prophet, Baha'u'llah, who came and was the 12th Imam and ushered in a new age of unified religion, and so on and so forth with the other eschatologies. They believe they are symbolic and are pointing to things that have already happened with prophets and the advancement of society. Okay, Rastafarianism. So they believe that in the same thing as the Christians, the Christian eschatological tradition, so the second coming of Jesus, except through a different lens. They believe that the people of Israel that are supposed to be returned to their rightful land, the children of Israel that are referenced so much in the Hebrew Bible and the Tanakh, is referencing the people of Africa who were enslaved and sent about the world, and that the descendants of Africa are the lost children of Israel and will be returned to Zion, will be returned to their homeland and live in an age of peace. Hinduism. It's important to note that Hindus live in a sort of eternalistic view of everything. Not that there aren't beginnings and ends, but there are cycles and numbers to how things occur in the world, and the universe, I should say, outside of the world. Vishnuites, or Vaishnites, as they're sometimes called, believe that Kalki, the 10th and final avatar of Vishnu, will reincarnate as Shiva and simultaneously dissolve and regenerate the universe. whatever that means. That sounds sick. Now, devotees to Shiva, or Shivites, believe that Shiva is always and incessantly destroying and regenerating the world as he pleases. So when looking at Hindu eschatology, it's important to kind of step into their frame of mind. It's hard for us Westerners who often look at things as this big timeline, but in the East, they often look at things in a more eternalistic cycle. And in Hinduism, their cycles are called kalpas, and they're continuous. So there's this theme of dissolving, death, but also regeneration and starting new. This leads us to Buddhism, which is another dharmic way of life, and the Buddhists, like the Baha'is, are eternalistic, so there is no beginning, there is no end. But it is important to note that in some Buddhist traditions, there are three major, but many under those three. There are writings of the fifth Buddha, the coming of the fifth Buddha, Gautama Buddha, the famous Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama being the third. Well, then there was a fourth, and there's yet to be a fifth, and these writings state that there will be a fifth many, many years from now, named Maitreya. Now, the Buddha said that Maitreya will come in 5,000 years, and in this time, which you can calculate to around 4,000, the year 4,300 about, at this time, the Buddha said that all dharma, all knowledge that I've taught will be lost in this time period. And Maitreya will come and restore all of this lost knowledge, bringing peace and harmony, and Maitreya himself will become a bodhisattva, attain nirvana, as Buddhas do. Okay, lastly is Taoism. Now, there are a lot of Chinese familial ancestral spiritual traditions, as well as Japanese, like Shintoism and things like that, but they all are kind of lumped into this same vein because they had very, very similar views about life, and they didn't often involve, like in the West, the end of the world. So the way that Taoists view things, and you could also lump in Shintoism and Confucianism, they believed that it just doesn't matter. They weren't concerned with a timeline, the end of the world. All you can be concerned with in Taoism in particular is your own being, participation in the Tao, the essence of everything, which is kind of beautiful. It's kind of anxiety releasing for someone who lives in the West and everyone's always talking about the world's gonna end all the time. When's it gonna end? Kind of cool. Okay, so that is the end of the world in every major religion. Let me know what you think. And as always, let's keep the conversation going.